Right, hi everyone. I think we might just get underway. Thank you all for coming along today. My name's Wade Pearson, and we're going to be talking about the legal mistakes that game developers make and hopefully how to avoid them. So, this talk is mostly for studios rather than freelancers where you're working on other people's games. So, if you're a solo dev, that's fine too. A lot of this will be quite relevant. We're going to go a little bit beyond the basics. So if you are interested in the basics, if you're thinking of starting your own studio, highly recommend you check out my talk from last year's NZGDC 2021. That's where we talked about, I think, the 5 to 7 key steps for starting a studio. So things like making a company, having a shareholders agreement to avoid those nasty co-founder disputes, employing or contracting people, understanding IP, and everyone's favorite, dealing with contracts. Well, my favorite, probably no one else's. So have a look at that. If you're watching this in the future on YouTube, then go listen to that one first and then come back to this one. It's a pretty good one. So this also only scratches the surface. We're going to dive into a few examples, but as always with law, there's a whole lot more to it. The devil's in the details, and it depends on your circumstances. So please don't take any of this as a precise roadmap of what to do next in your situation, but hopefully it gets you thinking about the right things. First, a little bit about me. This is me and my family. This is my wife, Radi, on that side, our 3-year-old Elliot, and our newest member of the family, Macklin, who's 3 months old. So I'm the last 2 days I've had the most sleep I've had in a long time, which is both good and bad. They are a heap of fun, and I really do miss them, so I'm actually quite looking forward to getting home tomorrow, but also quite happy to be here and be with everyone. I'm a gamer myself. I play PC games when I get time, which at the moment is not a lot of time. I'll let you decide whose fault that is, but that's also fine. I play a few board games and sometimes tabletop role-playing games if I can, again, find the time. I'm also the chair of Startup Dunedin, which is a non-for-profit trust based in Dunedin, which helps to support founders and remove some of those barriers if you are looking to start a studio. And so if you can't tell by now, I like dealing with people who are starting studios and businesses and doing cool things. The main reason I'm here today is because I'm a lawyer at Galloway Cook Allen, so I'm a commercial lawyer, and I help startups, game developer studios, bigger businesses. I do contracts and capital raising and lots of fun stuff. Again, fun probably has quote marks around it. Galloway Cook Allen is based in Dunedin and Wanaka. We're about 70 or 80 people. Really cool place to work. They're very nice. You know, they let me fly up here for 3 days instead of doing any work. So big thank you to Galloway Cook Allen and to my wife for looking after both of our children pretty much by herself. So that's pretty great. So that's me. And today we're going to talk about law, and what I want to say is that law isn't scary. Lawyers aren't always scary. Mistakes are important. They can cost you money, stress, time, opportunities, but they're all manageable. And if you can at least think about the right things and be aware of what to look out for, you're hopefully going to have a much better time and be able to focus on the things that you want to do, which is make a really cool game. Today we're going to look at kind of 5 areas really, which are a bit more of a red flag or a bit more of a area with some potential pitfalls, and they're just things to think about. We're going to look at some more specific examples, and there's a few tips throughout as well. So the first area we'll look at is profit sharing. This is where you've got a team of employees or contractors and you say to them, we're going to launch this game, and when it gets launched, you're going to get 1% of the profits, or 5%, or whatever. It's somewhat common. I do see a lot of studios wanting to do this, but it's not as simple as you might think. And while it can reward your team, it's easy to get it wrong and to have some bad results because of that. One way it can go wrong is that you just don't do the maths right, and it's not that the maths is easy. It can be quite tricky, and you also can't see into the future. So what that can mean is you do get through, you develop this game, you launch it, it has some success, and then the numbers just don't work. And the money you were expecting to make, maybe to fund development of another game, to grow your studio, to pay the rent or the mortgage, that doesn't come in. And that's obviously a bit of a problem. On the other side, you might end up not rewarding your team as much as you wanted to. So they were expecting this thing to come out of it, and they only get a tenth of that. And then they go, well, I'm going to go move somewhere else. And that's not what you want when you've just had a game launch well. Beyond that, though, it can also impact on investors. So if you are going down that route of, okay, we need some money, we're going to go talk to an investor and get some money into the business, sometimes they might look at this and go, okay, you did your own profit sharing agreement, you wrote it down on one page, you didn't really do any research, it's not actually fit for purpose. And then the investors might say, well, actually, we don't want to invest anymore. And then you don't have enough money to finish developing your game. And again, that's really bad. So one thing to think about is kind of anything you're doing, it's not just, okay, is this going to work now? Is it going to be fine tomorrow? It's what's the effect in 2 years or 3 years? And if you can have that mindset of thinking ahead, you'll hopefully be able to avoid some of the mistakes. I'm not at this point talking about employee share schemes, which is a whole nother topic, probably a whole nother talk, or phantom share schemes, if that's a thing. But if any of those words mean anything, do talk to a lawyer, because they're, again, important to get right. So let's talk about equity. Do people have a vague idea of what shares are? Some nods. Cool. So ownership of your company. So let's imagine it's mostly your game, but you've got two people with you who are really important to the game too. So let's say you've got 60% of the shares in the company, the other two have 20% each. And then you decide you need someone else to do some work. Now, you could pay them, but you don't have any money. Paying people is quite hard when you don't have money. So instead, what you do is go, oh, we're going to pay you with some shares. You work for this much and then you get this percent of shares. And I've seen this happen a lot, especially startups when you don't have the money to pay people. That can be a problem. That can be more expensive than you think. It's easy to go, well, these are just shares that, let's be honest, made up bits of nothing that don't actually matter, except they do. And down the ladder, they really, really do, down the track. What can happen is, you end up with too many cooks. If you've got a company where you've got 10 or 14 shareholders at an early stage, that's quite hard to make decisions. It's quite hard to get things done because everyone's got a share and a say. And look, there are other ways to give everyone a say. You can have all the shares in the company, but have a really good relationship with your team and your employees and achieve the same goal, but without all these other issues. Secondly, if you are paying people in shares or giving away shares willy-nilly, you end up with not enough of the company for yourself. So especially when you go down that investment route, investors will look at what percentage you have. So let's say you have 60%. Okay, that's probably pretty good. If you had 40% and then an investor comes in, you're going to be diluted from 40% down to, say, 30%. And then you might need to raise money again. So that means, again, you're going to get diluted. And let's say you're down to 15% now. By that point, you're getting close to launching a game. It's really hard. You've got to work long hours. You've got to put your heart and your soul into this game, into the studio. And you only have 15% of the kind of end reward. That's a concern. And for investors, that's actually a concern. So it's kind of counterintuitive, but a good investor will actually want you to have enough of the company. They'll want you to have a decent percentage of shares, because otherwise you're not going to be committed, you're not going to be invested into the game, into the success of the studio. Finally, having too many shareholders can just be an issue when they disappear. So we had a client who had their bank pulled funding almost overnight. It wasn't a great move. And so they had to run around and sign some resolutions and do a couple of boring legal things. But one of the shareholders had just disappeared. Turned out they'd gone to Thailand for a couple of weeks and just not told anyone. But it was really awkward because literally we need the signature and we don't know where they are. When it's four of you, you probably know where everyone else is. When it's 20, it's a bit harder. So take a bit of care if you are thinking of paying people in shares. It's the simple version is it's more expensive than you might think. On the other side of the coin, you might, like I said, want investment and go out and talk to an investor and get some money into the company, and that's great. It's really important to have clear expectations. So if you've got a friend who's going to put in $40,000, great, or a rich aunt or uncle, cool. If you're going to Hill Farrens or Ventures or whoever, some venture capital fund, professional investor, and they're going to put in $500,000, great. But they're two very different investors. So on the one hand, your friend probably doesn't really care what happens to the money. They probably want their money back and maybe a little bit extra. Whereas a professional investor will have a very clear idea of how they want to get their money back, what type of return they want to make. It's not unreasonable to think that for every dollar they put in, they want to get 10 back or 20 back. So that's very different from just a kind of friendly face who's like, oh, just give me a little bit of interest, that's fine. So whatever you do, make sure you do have really clear expectations between you and anyone you're giving shares to. Taking money is leveling up. It makes everything a bit more important. So Mario made a really good comment before in one of the talks around all that stuff that you do at the early stage where, it's not quite right. You didn't quite properly. Once you've got someone else's money into the company and you're employing others, it becomes more important. And there's more room for mistakes and there's more room for issues. And the final point, company law isn't actually that simple. It's not that interesting either, let's be honest. Coming to conferences like this makes my day job a lot more fun than just reading the Companies Act. But there are things that you wouldn't necessarily think make sense, and you might read something online but it's actually from the States and their legal system is different and it doesn't work here, and it can be tricky. So to me, there's a lot of things you can do by yourself and don't worry about talking to a lawyer. When it comes to shares and equity and options and convertible notes and all that sort of stuff, just have a think, slow down a bit, probably talk to a lawyer if you can. That would be great. So, intellectual property. This is a huge topic. Sam down the back did a talk yesterday, which I didn't get to see, but he talked into a bit more detail around IP and how important it is for any gaming studio. My talk from last year had a kind of overview as well, but we're going to look at one point. So we'll start with a core principle, which is it is absolutely vital that your studio owns the IP in your game. So you need to understand what IP is going into that game and make sure you do own it. Anyone who works on the game should be assigning or transferring their IP to you. Not all of their IP, just the game related stuff. This is often pretty easy because you employ them, you've got an employment agreement. Please tell me you have an employment agreement. And that should hopefully say that. There's a pretty standard clause, it's not rocket science. Contractors, same deal. You've got a contractor agreement and it has that in there. If you've got co-founders working in the business with you, you, again, hopefully have a shareholders agreement and that hopefully does that same thing. The trick comes when it's volunteers. So someone who's just kind of devoting their time for free. They really like the game, the concept, whatever. They want the exposure. Think whether maybe you just pay them. If they're doing actually a really good service, then exposure doesn't pay the bills. Just pay them for good work. But if you can't do that and it is a volunteer, some circumstances you do need to take a bit of care. So let's look at an example. Got this lovely piece of concept art. It's actually a painting from the British Library, apparently, because I was trying to find images that I could actually use. Again, I didn't want to get the IP wrong and then talk about IP. In hindsight, I should have asked you, Jean-B, and got concept art from Criminals Within. Would have been really good. So for next time, check out that Instagram. It's got great concept art. So hopefully not done by volunteers, I'm going to say. Yeah, cool, easy, good. So imagine this is done by a volunteer and not someone from the 1800s. They do it, it's great. You don't pay them, you don't have anything in writing because this is a friend. You don't want to give them with a contract, God no. So this is the example. That then gets incorporated into the game, goes on and releases. So let's look at how that can play out. Scenario one is that everything's going well. You don't know there's an issue. No one's complained. Great. When it comes time to raise money, the investors may, or hopefully at some point will, look at your business and look at contracts you've signed and go, have you done this all properly? Or more so, where have you gone wrong and is that really bad or not? And that might be when they go, look, this is a really big issue. You've got this core art that's in your game, and actually it was, this person probably has some claim to that. That's going to be a really big problem if it ever comes out. And so they pull out. And then you don't have the money to finish the development of the game, and that's really painful. Scenario two. Forget everything I just said. You raise some money, great, everything's fine. But then when you go to raise more money, they look a little bit closer, and that's when they find this issue. And then you're further down the track. In fact, you've taken more money on, there's more expectations on you, and that's when it all turns to custard. Or the third option there, everything goes well, forget about investors, you launch the game, it's wildly successful, and then you get sued by this poor concept artist volunteer. And then you have a really big struggle because you're facing this big lawsuit. So that's just to give you a flavour of, you never quite know how something will play out. And it could be that you've got, even in your own studio now, a concept artist did some work and you never paid them and you never agreed to anything, and it's actually fine. But you won't know until 2 or 3 or 4 or 10 years down the track. And that's what makes it quite hard to navigate. So we are really good for time, I think, hopefully. So we're going to talk about publishing agreements. Who here is thinking of, dealing with a publisher? Okay, cool. We've got a few hands. This is not going to be entirely wasted. That's great. When I talk about contracts and legal stuff generally, as a lawyer, I should say, talk to your lawyer, do all this. As a realist, I say, look, there are lots of times you won't. And there are lots of things you can do yourself and you probably get it about right and it's fine. This is not one of those things. This is something where I think you should get a lawyer to look at this early on, if possible. Whether they mean to be or not, regardless of whether it's a good publisher or a bad publisher, they can be full of hidden hooks and things that you don't really understand or realize what the implications are. Apart from the legal issues, there can be commercial, practical, financial issues that unless you've had good advice, not just from a lawyer, you may come out with quite a problem. And there are some horror stories around there, around the network of things that have gone horribly wrong with engaging with publishers. So we could probably spend an hour talking about publishing agreements and negotiating with publishers. We won't. We don't have time for that. So we're going to focus on one thing, which is the money. So if you don't know what a publishing agreement is, they come in all shapes and forms. But generally you have a publisher who wants to publish your game. They're going to give you a sum of money, which will take you through to launch. So that's funding the development. And then once you've launched, they're going to recoup that money and have a revenue share, a split of the revenue coming in from the game. And that's how they make their money. They may also do marketing and PR and porting and a whole bunch of other things, depending on the agreement. So it's really important that you do understand the financial side and then, explain it to someone who has no concept of gaming and see what they say. And if that all lines up, then that's a really good sign. If they have some questions, then you might want to check whether you've actually understood it. Remember that the money you get from a publisher is an advance. It's a loan, you have to pay it back. So you need to know how you pay it back, which we'll get to. But you also need to understand how it gets paid. So I don't think you ever just, get a big sack of cash given to you when you sign. That would be great, but I haven't seen that yet. Generally, you have milestones tied to development. So, a certain build or certain parts of the game or a vertical slice or whatever leading up to that release candidate, the final build. There can be some issues here. So on the one hand, let's say you're working on time, everything's going well. You put forward the build that you need to the publisher, but they're slammed. And so they don't actually get round to approving it for 3 weeks. they should have done it within 3 days, but it takes them 3 weeks. They probably won't pay you until they've approved the build, which can be a real problem because you're expecting that money coming in because you've done everything you need to, but they're not actually holding their end of the bargain, and unfortunately you're the one who then has to try and pay staff without any money in the bank account. And again, paying people without having money is difficult. Very high quality stuff today. So do have a look at payment terms, do have a look at how that whole process actually works and make sure you really understand it. Also, definitely focus on repayment. So the revenue share, the split of royalties, whatever you want to call it. That can make or break you, to be honest. So what we've seen sometimes is you get a bunch of money, right, to make the game. So it gets you all the way through to launch, great. And then you launch and it goes well and you are making a whole lot of sales, awesome. But the publisher is taking, let's say, 100% of revenue, from what's left over after paying Steam and whatever. So for that first 3 months, say, they're taking all the money that you would otherwise be making. And that's to repay their investment that they've put in you and recoup their money, and that's conceptually fine. But then you've actually got 3 months where you don't have any money. And again, if you don't have any money, you can't pay your staff. And that's really awkward because you've just released this game and it's going super great and it's really successful. And you've got to talk to your team and say, we actually don't have any money in the bank account at the moment because we didn't realize that the publisher was going to take all of that for these 3 months. That's a really tricky position to be in. And the only real way to avoid it is to have understood that when you were signing the publishing agreement and go, okay, this is how it's going to work 2 or 3 years into the future, which is a hard skill to have and to be able to look that far ahead and know what's important or isn't. So ultimately it comes down to cash flow and whether you can pay your team. Also just a somewhat minor point, but not always, internal versus external costs. So a publisher will, like I said, do some marketing. And if they pay for some Facebook ads, they will probably charge you for that, which is fine because those ads are for your benefit. And that's fine. That's an external cost. But if they're doing some, say, consulting of marketing or, marketing strategy or something like that, they shouldn't probably be charging you for that as well, because that's just what they do. That's their whole purpose. And that's kind of part of the deal of how they get their money. So if they're charging you for it specifically, you're actually paying twice for the same thing. That's probably more a good publisher, bad publisher. The good ones won't do that. The bad ones might try and sneak it in there. And that can often, if you do see a clause in a contract that's a bit weird or a bit harsh, that might just say something about the person you're contracting with, and that might give you a chance to go, actually, do we really want to be in business with these people if they put in this crazy clause? Anytime, I talked about this last year too, anytime you see something which says, a 2% daily interest rate, don't sign that contract. 2% daily interest is about, that's 700%, 500% per annum. Instead of your 10%, like it's a massive number. So if someone is actually putting that in there because they think it's a good idea, you probably don't want to do business with them. You probably go for someone else. But it doesn't happen often, thankfully. I've only ever seen it once. So the money is really important when you get to publishing agreements, and it's not simple or straightforward. It does require a bit of thought and a bit of discussion. If you're going to ask me what's a good deal with a publisher, the answer is how long is a piece of string? It really depends. It changes over time, and it depends on your game and your studio and your circumstances. One thing you can do to make life a bit easier is if you have signed a NDA, a non-disclosure agreement or a confidentiality agreement, check that you can disclose to your advisors. So you should always be able to disclose to your lawyer or your accountant. Again, if someone gives you a bit of paper saying, don't tell your lawyer about this, that's a very big red flag. Just run. But if you can also extend that to other advisors, so, mentors or people on your advisory board who are, others within the industry, then that's quite helpful because they've been around the block and they've signed 4 or 5 publisher agreements in their life. So, they can give you a bit of a steer of what works and what doesn't. Also do your research. There is actually a lot online that can be really helpful. So Raw Fury are a publisher, I want to say Sweden, and they've released their publishing agreement online. That here's the template, here's how we do things. So it's a good kind of basis if you're that way inclined, if you don't mind reading legal contracts, which some people don't, then that can be a really good thing to look and go, okay, that's what they say here, but the one I'm getting says something entirely different. Why is that? Does that make sense? Does it not? There's also a series of articles, I think 9 articles, by a UK lawyer called Tim Repper-Davies. He's from Sheridan's, and he's got a series of articles called Contract Killer. So if you Google that, you'll find it. I'll post the link on my Twitter later. He just goes into a whole bunch of detail around what to look out for in publishing agreements, and it's super helpful, super useful resource. So there are some good resources out there. There's some less good resources too, but do a bit of digging and you'll find some good stuff online. The final point to remember is that if you're dealing with a publisher, they want to publish your game. They like you, they think you're awesome, and they want to be involved. So you can negotiate. You shouldn't feel like, okay, well, this is take it or leave it. They're bigger and smarter than me. I don't know what I'm doing. I'll just sign it away. Like, you can be clear about what you want, what your expectations are, and especially around what your assumptions are and what their assumptions are. I think that's a really key point. So back yourself to be able to negotiate, even though it's scary. So, the key point I'd like you to walk away with today, and you can quote me on this, is that lawyers are tools. That's why I've got the picture up there. It's good. It's good. And that's my speech. No, there's more to that. So what I mean by that, some lawyers are tools. Let's call it fair. You get it in every industry. It's fine. Use the right lawyer for the right job. Don't use a sledgehammer when you need pliers. So you might work with a big firm, and that's great. I've nothing against big firms. If you're just starting out and you only have $200 to spend on legals, they might not be the right choice right now. You might want to upgrade to them later. Likewise, you might work with a small local firm that does not understand gaming, and maybe they were born a long time ago and didn't really get this internet thing. Again, probably not the right lawyer for you. Even if you do find the right lawyer, you might not use them for everything. So I've got plenty of clients where they want some more detailed intellectual property work. They're going and doing trademarks overseas. No point going to me for that. I'll send you away and say, hey, go talk to one of these people, because that's what they do all day, every day, but they don't do the other stuff. That's, I think, really important. And finding someone who understands gaming and who understands the stage of where you're at. So especially when you're a startup, it is, I think, a undervalued skill is understanding and empathizing with your journey and knowing what's important and how to prioritize. Most startups, to be honest, could benefit from $20,000 worth of legal advice, but no one's got that money straight off, right? So it's really a case of going, okay, so you can do these 3 things, which as a lawyer, I'm a bit scared and a bit worried, but I know that you're going to let those things go, and this 4th thing is important, and we'll pay me for that, and we'll do some work, and it'll be fine. And it's that prioritizing and understanding what's really important. One tip, if you want good work from a lawyer, and you, and this applies to all professionals, if you want good work, but without breaking the bank, the one thing you can do is give them more time. So if you send me something 4 o'clock on a Friday saying I need this within the next hour, and it's a 70-page publishing agreement, I'm going to swear at you from my computer screen, and then I'll call you up and be like, hey, so look, this doesn't actually work. We don't have time. But if you give me a couple of weeks, great, easy. And you can then prioritize and fit it around other things, and it just gives you a bit more flexibility, probably leads to a better result and a lower bill, which is always apparently what people like. If there's an old saying, if you think good advice is expensive, wait till you have bad advice. It's going to cost you more. And this is especially true with lawyers, and like I said, not all lawyers are equal. We were working with a client who raised some money, which is great, got some money into the company, and then they kind of came over to us and they wanted to raise some more money, and we took a look, and they'd gone to another lawyer and they got in a shareholders agreement, it wasn't fit for purpose. It wasn't very good. That also issued some shares to themselves to kind of use it in an employee share scheme. Unfortunately, the lawyers didn't do something really basic in company law, and so those shares didn't exist. So that was kind of a waste. And they had this structure which no investor would ever invest in that structure now. So it's like, well, great, you've raised once, but you will be unable to raise any more money. And this isn't a business that just trucks along. It needs to raise and raise again. So I'd really feel for the founder, because he'd paid a lawyer for some work and then basically had to pay that much again to fix it all. And that's a really awful position to be in. So do be cautious of bad advice. Final point, because we've been a bit kind of doom and gloom and a bit mistakes and scary, and I don't want to end on that note. So don't have too little advice, but don't have too much either. There'll be times when you just have to back yourself to do it, and you won't necessarily pay a lawyer for anything, and that's fine. And you might have a problem down the line, but you can probably also fix it. Ultimately, I think your job as a developer, as a studio owner, is to bring your studio to life, to bring your idea to life and get this awesome game out in the world. And law and lawyers and other professional services, they're just there to support you in that. So don't get too much or too little advice. Cool. We're nearing the end. We're on our final tips. I'm just going to shoot through these really quickly. Number one, probably incorporate a company if you haven't already. A lot of what we've been talking about doesn't work if you don't have a company. So it's a bit more complex than that. But again, check out my talk from last year as we go into a bit more detail around company versus sole trader. 2, get tax right. Talk to an accountant who understands tax. That can be one where you do get a bill quite quickly if you've got it wrong. And you must always pay the IRD. They have lots of special privileges that you have to pay them first, so don't get into trouble with IRD. It's just not worth it. And finally, do check your name for your game and for your studio. So a quick Google is a must. There's a website called onecheck.govt.nz which looks at domain name, trademark and company name, although you can change the company name if need be. So have at least a vague check that it's going to be different enough, unique enough. If you have something that's just a normal word, then it's going to be harder to show up in searches as well. So something that's unique. And tip number 4, and I can't stress this enough, I like playing games and I like playing your games. So if you want to send me any early builds or test code, that would be great. Thanks. It would be really fun. So we've got time for some questions, I think. I'm just going to check, and we've got hands up already. I think we've got a little while actually. So yep, down the front.
Do you have any really good examples of really bad lawyer stuff in like a game that has really bad lawyer stuff?
Yeah, a few. Yeah. So bad examples,
good example of a bad.
Good example of bad legal advice or something the lawyer did wrong. The one I mentioned before is probably one where the structure would have worked if it was a established plumbing business that was just going to go along like this and make some money, and that's totally fine. But for a startup, it just didn't work, and that really was a problem. There are certainly some horror stories out there, both of lawyers messing it up or people not going to a lawyer and then it implodes 3 years down the track because of that. That's probably the best one at the moment. So, yep. And there's a microphone there too.
Okay. So you mentioned that a situation where a contract would say we get all the money for 3 months. Why would a publisher do that? I mean, wouldn't it hurt the company that made the game for them, and wouldn't they just not want to do business with them again?
Well, yes and no. On the one hand, there's kind of what the industry norm is, and it's always any contract negotiation is what you're willing to accept. So if you're a publisher and you've got 10 potential titles and 9 of them agree to these terms and 1 doesn't, you might just let that other one go. So there's, negotiating imbalance and power imbalance, that's part of it. Two, it might be that you actually have more than enough money. So if you've got that 3 months cash, they can have the 100% for those 3 months or whatever, and then from after that 100%, it drops down to whatever percent, and then you start actually getting the money from your game. So it's about them recouping all the costs they put in to start with, and once they get that, it drops back to normal, if that makes sense.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, down the front here.
If you had one like top tip for people who have incorporated, but there's still just one person paying yourself, what's like your big
Yes.
tip around doing that safely and like?
Talk to an accountant. But do pay yourself if you can. That's good. You have a bit more freedom when it's just you. So if you're the sole shareholder in the company, it makes life a bit easier. When you've got an investor in or someone who's a bit more removed from you, then you have to have a bit more care. When you've got 20 shareholders, it's even more. But you do have a bit of leeway kind of in those early stages to fix mistakes before they become big. Cool. So I think one down the back. Yeah, right down the back on the left. Right.
So, yeah, sweet, awesome. So when it comes to finding the right lawyer, I guess it's been pretty tricky to find someone. So I'm wondering, so would you necessarily just go to business contract lawyers? Or would it be, because I know with entertainment, with games, because it's sort of, it's not film
Yeah.
per se, but they still have them under the class of lawyers. So would it be in that avenue that you'd need to go to a lawyer with understanding of marketing and that sort of thing? And at that point, how much would be sort of like the normal rates that you would expect?
Yeah. I wish I could give you an easy answer here. And look, take this with a grain of salt because I'm a lawyer and that's what I do is charge people and get paid. So there's a bit of self-interest here. But I'm trying to be objective about it. There's not a huge industry of games lawyers in New Zealand. I mean, I can think of kind of 5 or 6 who I think are pretty good and understand what they're doing. And even that might be a little generous. So, you know, and there's far more lawyers who just do general stuff. Sometimes a general lawyer will be good enough. To me, it's that empathy and understanding a bit of the industry, you know, knowing what Steam is, for starters. If you don't understand what Steam is, okay, maybe they're not the right lawyer for you. See who's active. So, look, I'm one. I'd like to think I do a pretty good job. I'm pretty upfront with fees and things, so... again, it depends on a whole lot of things, but as a ballpark, even doing a simple contract might be $1,500. It might be $2,000 to $3,000. If you're dealing with someone from a bigger firm, it probably costs a bit more. If you're dealing with someone from a smaller firm, it might be less, but it might be really bad. It's really hard to kind of talk in generalizations and really hard to give you a clear steer. But as well, once you're working with a lawyer, you've got a bit more flexibility around. You might have catch-ups, and this is what I often do is have catch-ups and have chats and talk about that kind of the strategy and the bigger picture, and that's actually really valuable. And ironically, I end up not charging for that, which probably doesn't make sense, but that's how it is, and that's actually, I'm quite happy with that. IP is one where, or intellectual property and trademarks, where you might want a bit more of a specialist, not someone who does it kind of once in a blue moon. That's why I probably wouldn't do it. I do it sometimes, but yeah, for gaming I say no, look, just go big or go home. And going home is an option. You know, you can just ignore trademarks and you might be okay. You might be. Please don't act on that and then sue me later. Yeah, I mean, employment can be easier, but also you've got the quirks there. So ask around is the other thing. So talk to other studios and ask them who they use, and more importantly, if they're happy with them, and take that with a grain of salt as well. Because sometimes I've heard recommendations from people, but they weren't that good as recommendations, or they said, oh, this person's terrible, and you go, oh, actually no, they actually did a fine job, but it was something in that whole relationship that was the problem. Yeah, down the back.
Hey Wade, so obviously there's heaps of funding options that gaming studios can seek. In your opinion, what are these different funding options, and what are the pros and cons of each from a legal perspective?
Tune in for next year's talk.
There you go.
There you go. You just wrote it for me. There are actually some good resources online. Again, more for startups, but some of that is applicable to gaming. So you've got, very quickly, publisher, that's potentially an option. You've got kind of bigger investors like venture capital firms or angel investors. You've got friends and family and fools, that's what they say, triple Fs, and that's sometimes true. You've got self-funding. If you've got a house and you just add to the mortgage, risky, but also, if you won't back yourself, then why should anyone else? Those are the main ones. I'm sure I'm forgetting one. And yeah, look, there are pros and cons to each, and it very much depends on your circumstances. Kickstarter, it works for some. I mean, board games or TTRPGs, that can be really good. You can do it for games, but probably wouldn't be my first choice, and even less would be equity crowdfunding. So just ignore that for now. Cool. So we're about at the end, I think, in terms of time. We might have time for a little bit more, but I think I'll just quickly jump to this. I'm around for the rest of the day and at the after party, so if you do want to talk in more detail, come say hi. We'll catch up later on. Good to see you in person finally. It's nice. So if you do want to get in touch, you can contact me professionally, wadepearson@galacticallen.co.nz. That email address sucks, I'm not going to lie. There are so many ways to get that spelled wrong, but it's a whole thing. It's fine. Just Google me as well. LinkedIn is also quite good. It's got all my articles on there, all but one. So if you want to look into some of the stuff in more detail, or the talk from last year, that's a really good place to go, and they're all in one location. Less professionally, Twitter and Discord, you find me loitering after hours when the kids are asleep. Tweet at me, DM me. I'm still new to Twitter. I don't really understand it. I'm not going to TikTok yet. That's just beyond me. So do have a look there, and I'll try and post some useful content there as well. Or Discord. I was saying to someone before, a lot of lawyers will network and deal, build relationships with clients over a game of golf or something. I don't like golf, but I'll gladly play a game with you. And then if you don't like me, you can cut my head off, or throw a beehive at me, or whatever. That's chivalry too, is my jam at the moment. So do feel free to get in touch. I'm here to help. I'm here for the rest of the day, and even if later, just send through an email. I'm hopefully not very scary. So any final questions? We might have another 5 minutes. No?
Silly question. So if someone's got a sensible question,
No, we like silly questions.
so an important part of our concept art of our original game was drawn by the 12-year-old son. Are we likely to get up in trouble with this once he's, at 8 years old?
Depends what he's like. Yeah. No, I think you'll be fine. And it's a good point though. It's around that risk. And to be honest, most startups, you're gonna do something wrong. You're gonna break a few eggs, and hopefully it's okay. It's knowing which ones you really, really need to focus on. So, good question. I wouldn't worry too much. So, good. Right. Well, if there are no other questions, thank you very much for coming along. It's been a privilege to be here. I'm sure I've forgotten something important, but I've had a lot of fun doing it. So thanks for all coming, and enjoy the rest of the conference.